Hello, my name's Samantha Bedford, and I am the founder and president CEO of Pico Digital Marketing. Today, I wanted to share, I've been doing digital marketing for the last 25 years, and recently I've got to put down all of my thoughts on what should be considered when you're launching a paid media campaign, not necessarily just in Google, but also thought processes with regards to audiences, ad testing, optimizations, and all of that good juicy stuff to basically make sure that you achieve growth and profit from the campaigns that you're running in the digital landscape. So you can download the go-to-market checklist, and this is basically the accompanying video that will, just maybe give you a little bit more insight than just some text on a page. So hopefully this is helpful. And if you have any questions, by all means, please reach out. So most of the time when I'm talking to new prospects, number one, there is a concern with regards to just the lead quality that's coming in. So it's, maybe there's a lot of leads coming in, but the quality of those leads is not what you would like. It's wasting a lot of your sales team's time following up on leads that are just not, they're tire kickers. They're just not leads that you, that are there for your business or that you want to bring in for your business. The other piece that I see a lot of is silos. So there's a lot of disconnect between different departments. So what's happening on the sales side? What are people talking about when they come in through to the sales and business development teams? What's keeping them up at night, and making sure that they're sharing that information with the marketing team, and also making sure that whatever we learn from all of the data we collect, which is one of the benefits of advertising digitally, is that we're sharing that information with all of the teams out there. So the sales team can know what we're saying, on our ads, that's resonating the best. The creative team can continue to evolve the imagery that we're putting together, for email marketing campaigns or even updates to the websites on the CTAs. And then at the end of the day, it's all about the customer experience. For me, it's all about, heartbeats, not just data. And I think that's one of the biggest things we all seem to forget about. There's so much that's spoken about out there about AI, all of the automation, bid automation, all of that good stuff, algorithms. And as much as all of that stuff is great, at the end of the day, the most important thing is humans, is the heartbeat, and caring about that. So I'm going to move on. Obviously, I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for Pico. Wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. We have over 20 years of experience, we do have 20 years of experience. We have 20 plus industry certifications, 92 happy clients. I believe that verified reviews are so much better than someone just plonking something on a website that's not verified. So feel free to take a look at those. We are listed on Clutch. We are an award-winning agency, and also we are recognized by Google as a premier partner, which essentially means that we are in the top 3% of agencies within the United States. So moving on from here, the program works, or the masterclass and also the downloadable content, the go-to-market checklist, is broken down into two specific categories. So one is just that KPI and strategy alignment, which is important for us to sort of take a look at, before launching a campaign. And then there's sort of these milestones that we need to be taking a look at once campaigns launched. All right, so let's get started. The KPI and strategy alignment. As you can see on this first tab, some of the most important things is your conversion goals. And I think the biggest thing here is just making sure that everybody is aligned. And I think it's also important to remember, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of AI, there's a lot of bid automation, there's a lot of great tools that are out there. But the tools are only as good as the tracking that we have set up in each one of those platforms. So platforms for everyone's benefit would be Google, Microsoft Ad, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So the first piece is, what is our core action? Because none of these algorithms are going to optimize to 3 different conversion types. Okay. It's really important that we make it very clear to each one of these platforms what the core action is. Is it a form fill? Is it a purchase? Is it a white paper download? Is it a newsletter sign up? So it's really important that one core action is defined, so that we can optimize towards that. And then it's also important to make sure that we have an understanding of a secondary action completion. So for example, we have a lot of clients where, they've signed up for the newsletter, but they haven't, for example, downloaded any content or filled out another lead form or made a purchase. But there's value in someone filling out, their information to stay, in touch with the company and to, receive the newsletters on a regular basis. So there is value in that. It's just at the end of the day, we don't know what that value will equate to in the future. So it's important that we track those things, but the algorithm's not optimizing to those things. Also, are we tracking calls? Are we tracking calls in platform? Do you use a call tracking provider? What's considered a good call length? What's considered a bad call length? Is there specific things we need to be aware of, like the call centers, we can only accept calls on weekdays from 9 till 5. Those are all important things for us to take into consideration. Also, is there any difference in how all of these platforms are measuring things? So obviously there's attribution out there. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend you go and take a look and Google, Google's attribution models, and you can see in there. But I mean, is your system, your CRM system, tracking a conversion on the last click? Is Google set up for first click? That's going to make a difference in, how each platform is recording the data. And these are important things that you need to understand. Do you have a click and view window set up? So if someone clicks on your ad, if you set a click window of 30 days and someone clicks on your ad in 31 days, that's considered, new. So, I mean, it's just all of these things need to be taken into consideration. And then what are the discrepancies? What are the current discrepancies between what we're seeing in platform? Is Google Ads showing that received 20, form fills, and the client's data is only, CRM data is only seeing 10? Why? It's important for us to understand that discrepancy. And by understanding that discrepancy, we're able to turn around and adjust our bidding methodology. So for example, based on clients' data, their cost per conversion, because they're only seeing 10 leads, could be coming in at $200, right? While in the platform, it's coming in at $100 because they're seeing double the lead volume, right? So what we need to do is we need to then turn around and say, well, if the client wants to reach $100 cost per conversion, and, and unfortunately only 50% of the leads from Google are coming into our platform, then we need to change our goal on Google side from 100 to 50. So that at the end of the day, the client's goal is still coming in at 100 and taking that discrepancy into consideration. I think it's also just important to understand, based on the industry that you're in, is, what's going to happen? What's that latency from when someone actually clicks on the ad versus someone actually coming through and converting? And when we say a conversion could be as simple as someone fills out the form or downloads a white paper. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to the advertiser is making sure that this turns into dollars, revenue for them. So what does that look like? So, you go from click to conversion, and then you can go from conversion to actual, closed deal. What does that look like? What does that average time frame look like? And then I've already mentioned, but basically the algorithm will only optimize to the data that is in that platform. So that's why it's so important to take all of this into consideration, before you start building out, any sort of bid strategy for any clients. In general, I think it's also really important for you to understand how the conversion tags fire. So, if you've got a white paper download, for example, when does the tag fire? Does the tag fire when someone clicks on the submit button? Does the tag fire when someone goes through to the thank you page? These are all important things for us to understand. Particularly when you're at, when sometimes you'll find that like events, for example, like registering for an event is not necessarily done on the client's website. It's done, offsite. And it's done on specific platforms that, cater to that. So, in that specific case, you might be sitting with a situation where you can track the button on your website and you can see how many people went from your website to the actual event registration page, but that doesn't mean they've registered. So that's why it's important to understand exactly how each one of these conversion tags fire. Obviously, follow your social channels, like all of the social channels, interact with your social channels, and also make sure that you get a list of competitors and you're following them on their social media channels as well. It's also important to have those conversations with the sales team. Like I said, there shouldn't be no silos in a company. And it's important to understand what problems are we solving? What are the pain points? What are keeping our potential customers up in sweats at night? And how do we solve for that? And making sure that our advertising is communicating that very clearly and concisely. Take a look at reviews. What are people saying about our product? What are people saying about our competitors? Do we have good reviews or do we have bad reviews? Which is just as important for us to understand what's going on there, not only because that information should be fed back to the support team, but it's also just as important for us to understand what we might want to put in our ads and in our ad copy. Because remember, when you're looking at reviews, you're hearing it from the customer. This is not something that a group of people are sitting in a boardroom concocting. This is from the customer. This is what they've put out there. And it's what they're willing to put out there publicly, across the entire globe, essentially. And, so it's really important that we take that into consideration. I think it's also important to make sure that we are out here to generate quality leads, quality repeat purchases and sales. We want the right people to come in and download our white paper. We don't want people just coming in and downloading content and content and content, because that's content, that is information that our sales team are now following up on and following up on. We need to make sure that it is the quality, not the quantity, that we are considering. Continuing on, what is the priority from a market standpoint? Is it USA versus EMEA? Is it California versus Texas? Do you ship to certain areas and not ship to certain other areas? You might have a client where, their property development, for example, and they only have a location that they're building in Colorado, and they might want to sort of target some of the surrounding states. These are all things that we need to take into consideration. We also need to know the campaign type. For example, what are we doing? Are we doing a branding campaign? Are we just trying to get people familiar with the brand and coming through to the website? Or is it lead gen, right? From a branding standpoint, your more important metrics are impressions, clicks, click-through rate. How are they interacting with social media? However, from a lead generation standpoint, you want to know that you are generating actual revenue from this effort. So there's two very different campaign type priorities, and you need to understand what those are. And then you also need to understand if there is any sort of other priorities we need to be aware of. Some clients, for example, they have a specific service line where they make better margins. So that needs to take priority, when we're building out our campaigns. There are, other things with regards to, they may have an overstock of products that they're trying to just shift off the shelves. Those are things that we need to take into consideration when building out programs. We also need to look at the UTM parameters. So this is specifically like a Google Analytics parameter. So It doesn't necessarily have to be a UTM parameter. Sometimes clients are using parameters that are pulled through from Salesforce. So there's loads of different ways, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are tracking and as best as we can from when someone initially sees that ad and interacts with that ad, comes through to the website and actually ends up becoming a lead, but then also becoming a closed deal or sale. And it's important for us to try and track as much as we can within that journey. And it's also important, as anybody out there, do not make your own custom changes to UTM parameters. Make sure you work with the right teams and you implement these properly and you don't tweak them, because at the end of the day, a small change in a UTM parameter can mess up client reporting. Account KPIs, brand goals, is it about dominance? Is it about competitors are actually bidding on your brand terms on Google, and we just need to be up there? Generic goals. Our generic goal is basically turning around and saying, okay, they might not be familiar with our brand, and the reality is the difference between the two. If they're already familiar with your brand, you don't want to be paying, a higher premium price for that specific conversion, because they're already familiar with who you are. While on the generic side of things, they're not familiar with who you are. You may have stole that business from a competitor, which means that specific conversion event is a lot more valuable than someone who's just coming in from your brand terms. So what is the goal? You can't sit there and just say, oh, I'm prepared to pay $100 per lead, form completion rate. That it should be different. It should be different for what a brand term should be generating those at versus what a generic goal should look like. And it's also important for us to understand what, at the end of the day, is the source of truth. Is it the client CRM system? Is it platform data? Which one is our source of truth with regards to when we're talking with our clients, when we're talking with our internal teams, that, this is the data that everybody is looking at. So once again, goes back to that original slide that I just had about understanding if there is any sort of discrepancies between platform and CRM data that we should know about and be taking into consideration. Exclusions, the biggest thing here is obviously back in the day, there was a lot to do with IP exclusions. We still can do IP exclusions. That's not a problem. A little bit more challenging though with remote work. So, but, still something to consider in, placing those in. But the biggest piece with exclusions is actually, are there any companies we want to exclude? You might even want to exclude, anybody coming through from competitors. Do we have a current customer list that we want to exclude? And also the biggest question to ask is, when was the last time these were updated? Because your current customer list, for example, is not going to be the same as it is today, that it was, 6 months ago. So it's important that we take that into consideration. And we have a, project management tool or, like an Asana or anything like that you choose to use to make sure that you're staying on top of these things. This is not something that should be set it and forget it. Do we have a clear direction on the audiences we are targeting? Have we been supplied, this is like our ideal customer? We need all of that level of information. Do we have any persona data supplied to us? Is there a priority within those audiences? Do we find that as much as we might want to target the CMOs or the CEOs or CFOs, that kind of thing, the C-suite, we might want to target them, but at the end of the day, our leads are coming through from the actual managers, right? Or the director level. And if that's the case, those are important things that we need to take into consideration from a priority standpoint. Also, not just from an audience and persona standpoint, but is there priorities on certain industries? Are we looking more for automotive or healthcare? Those are things that we need to take into consideration as well. We're now going to move on to milestones. So milestones is more looking at like, okay, we've got this great foundation. Now what? Now what does this look like? And okay, so we've got our ad copy. We've been running it for a while, but before we go ahead and do anything, what are competitors saying? Are we saying the exact same thing? You know, if they're saying that they're offering, you know, a reporting tool for, you know, starting price of their reporting tool is $14.95 a month, and our reporting tool is like $50 a month, should we be putting price in our ads? You know, because at the end of the day, we're all showing up on the same keywords. We need to stand out. Another tool that I like to use is just Moat. Moat is great for you to go and take a look at what people are doing from a display standpoint. You know, and also, as mentioned earlier, you should know what's going on your competitors' social channels and how are they talking? What are their color schemes? I'll never forget, I was working on the healthcare industry at one stage, and I put together an analysis of the creative out there across multiple different competitors, and every single one of them was using this light blue. So I'm like, nobody's standing out. They're all using the exact same color. You know, and it's as simple as that. But, you know, it's trying to get people to go back to those kind of basics can be a challenge when you're sitting there on a day-to-day campaign, looking at things like, I've got to change this bid, I've got to optimize this, I've got to change the budget. Going back to those basics is really a core part of successful campaigns. Are there themes that are working within the ads? You know, is there a specific call to action that we see is working well? Is there specific stats? You know, have we tested out using testimonials in the ads? Have we tested out using hashtags in the ads? You know, there's many things that we can put in there. Is there any new elements that we should be considering? Has the client just won an award that we should be putting out? Have they just developed this really great infographic? I think the biggest thing as well is also making sure that we're refreshing the creative. We should not just be looking at the creative and being like, oh, okay, well, it's up and running. You know, this is great. We need to be making changes every 90 days to creative. We've got to keep it fresh. What ads have a low click-through rate? Why? You know, is there a specific theme? Is it a specific group of keywords? Is it specific audience targeting? You know, can we improve those ads? And if we can't, should we be taking them down? You know, we need to be, you'll see that a lot of what we put up here is just loads of questions, and you need to know the answers to have a successful campaign. The biggest thing as well is also making sure that we're not making huge sweeping changes. That is the last thing that you want to do, because by making massive changes, you don't know what wins and what doesn't. You know, the smaller those changes, the better. Good example of this is you've got ad A and ad B. Ad A and ad B are both identical, other than, for example, the color of a button. That's it. Okay, that's your test. It's as simple as that. And be patient. You know, that's the biggest thing as well. Once again, don't work in silos. Share what's working, share what's learning, what you've learned, and make sure that the entire company is aware of it, because who knows, they might be able to use what you've just learned, you know, across their email marketing efforts, or maybe in their sales materials. And also just trying to understand if there's any different nuances between, you know, states, between countries. You know, there's specific keywords that work in the UK versus the US, that kind of thing. I think it's also just important to remember that there are nuances. There is nuances. You can't just optimization with a Z versus an S. You know, these are all important things. And once again, it's important to make sure that we're sharing that information. You know, is the call to CTA working differently in EMEA versus the US? Outside of just, you know, the tweaks to the ad copy, you know, are we seeing that certain products or certain industries perform better in different regions? Moving on to the ad copy specific, I mean, the audiences specifically, I think the biggest thing here is just making sure that you are not layering on so many different types of audiences, because once again, it goes back to, you know, your testing philosophy. If you've got, you know, if you're on LinkedIn, for example, and you are targeting groups and job functions and seniority, you know, and titles, which of all of those is working well for you? Yes, of course, you can go and get some demographic information, you know, on the LinkedIn reports. But at the same time, that information doesn't go down to the granular level that you need to make a campaign perform. So it's important that you take all of that into consideration when you're looking at your audiences and how you want to understand it. Okay. You can sit there and you can target, quality assurance, for example, versus operations, right? If you've bundled the two of them together, how do you know which one's performing better? You don't. It's all part of the testing philosophy, and testing, takes time, patience, and obviously statistical relevance. You can't just say this is one, when you've only been running it for a week. Make sure your audience is a good size, but manageable, don't go overboard. I usually try and get between 60 and 200,000. Sometimes I go much lower than that. Obviously the platforms will tell you, we need it much bigger than that. But I'm not here for the platforms. No agency should be there for the platform. No client should be there for the platforms. You're there for you, and you're there for your audience. And then the other thing as well is just taking a look at how you can play around with different audiences. Don't just, sit there, think about things of like, in Google, we can set up custom audiences, for example, that can target people who went to visit a competitor's website or who searched on keywords, competitor keywords. And once again, never a good idea to bundle the two together. Was it the site that worked better than the keywords? Right? I think you're getting the picture here. Milestones, moving on to sort of like that budgets. Budgets, I think the biggest thing here is one, obviously you need to stay within budget, okay? But I think a lot of people, once again, fall into this trap of silos. Like, oh, here's my budget for Google. Oh, here's my budget for LinkedIn. Oh, here's my budget for Facebook, right? And you've got these 3 separate budgets. But at the end of the day, it's more important to take that whole budget as a whole and determine, okay, LinkedIn's actually performing better than Facebook. So do I want to take budget away from Facebook and put more of that to LinkedIn so that we can increase our exposure on LinkedIn? Do we want to pause Facebook and just shift all the budget over to LinkedIn? Either way, it's important to make sure that we are looking cross-channel from a budget standpoint and a performance standpoint to make sure that we are meeting our clients' overall results, not working in these different silos. And sometimes that can be a challenge when you're working with different departments that are managing social versus search, or display versus search. So it really is important that you work with a company that is not putting those blockades in place and making sure that everybody is getting out of their own egos, their own heads, and looking at it from the bottom line of this is what we need to achieve, and this is the overall budget. Display's not working, move it, move the budget. That's it, go. It's not about display's done a bad job. This is about we need to, bring in the results for the clients. Are there any emerging competitors? So a lot of the time, we're sitting there and we're talking about the campaigns and we're looking at those initial competitors, that the client will supply us with. But is there anybody new to the market that's maybe going to take us by storm? These are things that we need to take into consideration, and also things that we can put into, like I mentioned, that, custom campaign where we can target our competitors. You could break those campaigns down into, these are my current competitors, these are emerging competitors. You can break things down. When you're thinking of these strategies. If you have a low click-through rate on a keyword, why? Is the keyword relevant? And if it is, what can we do to improve that click-through rate? Do we need to move it into its own ad group with tailored copy? Obviously that would be step 1 before pausing it, but basically taking a look at everything in the campaigns, and also taking a look at longer considerations. So don't just look at the past 7 days, look at the past 30 days, the last 90 days. There's a lot of things from a keyword standpoint where you might have those straggling keywords, that over the last 7 days, they maybe only spent $5. And it's like, okay, no problem. But then you go and take a look at it over 90 days, that amount adds up very fast. And then you're in a situation where if that keyword hasn't generated any sales, or leads, then you've already spent all that money on something that's just not working. So it's really important for you to take a look at things over, I usually try and look at it from a 70, 30, and 90-day consideration. And then also just looking at it from a seasonality standpoint. What worked, during, Christmas last year? What worked during Thanksgiving last year? When did we see a drop-off in people coming through And, over the Christmas period, did we see that we didn't actually generate any conversions or leads between Christmas and New Year? And if that's the case, we might want to pause the campaign the following year, or we might want to run just on brand terms, or considerably drop the budgets. These are all important things for us to take into account. And also continuing to look at just expansion opportunities. We are in the digital space. If you wake up tomorrow morning and something hasn't changed, or something new's not on the horizon, or someone's tested something, we all know that this industry changes all the time. It is exceptionally important that we stay on top of those trends and see how those can influence our clients' campaigns. For example, we're running a search campaign. Everything's running great. The campaign's performing well. The client's getting, great quality leads at a certain volume, and everything's working great there. What next, right? What's next? Can we maybe test out a video campaign? Should we be testing out different audio, message formats? So like trying out message ads versus conversation ads in LinkedIn. There's a lot of things that we can put out there. But I think, it's important to make sure that we're constantly evolving our campaigns, and not just sitting there and letting the bread and butter campaigns, just literally just run. It's important for us to continue to be innovative and trying to find new ways to generate new conversion events and new exposure for the brand. How's the landing page working? Landing pages can be a little bit challenging. So sometimes we're taking, the visitors, from our ads through to the regular client site, right? And we might be taking them to specific pages on the site. For example, if we're doing an industry campaign, to healthcare, we don't want to take them to the homepage of the website. We want to take them to the specific page, speaking to them in their language, right? Once again, this is about heartbeats, right? And what is specific to them, and what's specific to the healthcare industry, not what's specific, what your product solves for everybody. They want to get down to the nitty gritty. Time is essence, time is money. So the sooner we can get to it, and the sooner we can show that we solve that problem for them, the sooner we're more likely to actually generate revenue from it. The other challenge is sometimes you're going to have, a specific demand gen landing page. Obviously, that's going to have a high bounce rate. The whole idea of that is for someone to just fill out the form, so either they do or they don't. It's a pretty clear cut, no gray area. But if there is gray area and you're seeing some really high bounce rates and, that kind of thing, and we're just trying to figure out why are people not completing the path that we want them to take, consider putting some heat mapping on there. Consider making some changes to the website. We don't need to just look at like the front end of like our ad copy testing or our image testing on our ads, things like that. It's also just as important to take a look at what's happening on the landing page and how can we make that a little bit more streamlined. And moving on, this is sort of more of like towards the tail end. I know I've been rambling on for a while, but I'm hoping you're finding it really helpful and useful for your efforts. But rethink remarketing as well. What list should we target? Are there any new tactics that we can try? And also, I think the biggest thing here is just making sure we're not double dipping. If you've got the budget, great, feel free to double dip. But a lot of the clients that I work with and a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the past, we don't need to. I think the biggest thing as well about double dipping, if you're doing a display campaign or a remarketing campaign, should I say, through Google Ads, right? So you're in the Google Ads platform and you're doing it that way, and you're targeting the Google Display Network, obviously. A lot of other platforms out there, one of their primary partners is the Google Display Network. So if you're already doing it through the Google Ads platform, or why would you do it through another partner? One, there could be differences in pricing. One could be based on a cost per thousand versus a cost per click. The other thing is, what does that look like from a spamming standpoint? Maybe, could be spamming someone too much and it gets overwhelming. But the other thing is it makes it harder to control the messaging that you're putting in front of someone, particularly if you're using any sort of sequential messaging on your remarketing campaigns. Reporting, I hate this. When people come in and, I've seen reports, from clients, I've seen reports from other agencies, I've seen reports all over the place. But I think the biggest thing, and as you've seen on this entire thing, it's questions. and you need to know the answers. And this is the same with the reports. And it's just as important for us to understand and explain to a client, what exactly did we do? Why? Why did we try that? How did we test it? What are the results? What are we doing next? And how are we going to prioritize that? And, you know, a client can go in and they can just look at the data, right? They can log into the Google Ad system and they can go in there. They can see how many changes you've made. They can, you know, I mean, if you're working with a savvy client, they're going to know. They're going to know that they can do this. You know, our job is to show value. That is our job, not just to get the results, but at the end of the day, we need to be showing value. And showing value is by showing how our brains are working, how our strategies are functioning, you know, and not everything's going to work, right? You're going to test something and it's not going to work, right? But the bottom line is sharing that with a client and saying, look, we tested this. This is why we tested it. This is why we thought this would be a good test. But you know, at the end of the day, it didn't work. And we pulled the plug at a good time. You know, we haven't wasted money. We've learned and we're moving on. The other thing is going back to basics is the settings. I think a lot of people, when they set up a campaign, they go and take a look and they set up everything. They're in their platform. You know, they go through everything. But, you know, Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of them, you know, they change the way you can launch campaigns all the time. You know, you could launch a campaign 4 weeks ago on Google, for example, and there might be this new option for, you know, automated bidding the next time you set up a new account or a new campaign. So it's important to continually keep an eye on the settings tabs on all of the platforms that you are running on. And it's also important to make sure you're looking at settings as like device types, your bidding and delivery options. Is mobile working? Is mobile not working? Oh my gosh, please tell me mobile's working, because if it's not a good idea. You know, and then obviously just making sure from a setting standpoint that if there's any suppression lists that we need to continue to update, any negatives that we need to update, display placements that we should be, you know, negatively matching. And also, like I mentioned previously, any audiences, you know, if you've got customer lists, we should be updating those. You know, it should be a 90-day program. And we've already gone through this a lot, so I'm not going to go through it too much. But I think, you know, make changes, make them small, test them off, you know, have a testing strategy. You should be constantly testing. There should be nothing that's not getting tested. And then don't make a lot of changes at once. Be patient, understand what's working and what's not working, and please keep a record of it. The last thing you want to do is go and recommend a change that you've already done, like, you know, 18 months ago. And, you know, this is important to make sure that you are not just from a testing standpoint, but just in general, what changes did you make? Because if you don't document that, how do you know what had a positive or a negative impact? So I really appreciate you joining me today. I thank you for listening to the masterclass. I really appreciate it. From a next step standpoint, feel free to book a 45-minute strategy call with me, or, you know, just use the materials to make the digital landscape and advertisers out there, you know, make it a better experience for everybody. And once again, biggest thing always to take into account, heartbeats. That's what we're talking to, not data. Thank you very much.